Peace be with you. So this morning I wanted to make a video about what is important in the Quran and how to read it, because I've noticed a lot of people don't really have the time to read the Quran, and it is not a linear book. And since it's not a linear book, it's kind of like a peeling of an onion. So I'm gonna start with what is important in it and what is the core of that onion, and then everything it kind of expands upon that core, and I'll try to explain that. So the easiest way to explain how to read the Quran is start with the chapter called Fatiha. Surah Fatiha, it is the first chapter of the Quran. It is the chapter that most Muslims who pray recite several times during each prayer. And it goes, Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, most compassionate, most merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. You alone do we serve or worship. You alone do we ask for help. Guide us on the straight path, and the Arabic word for the straight path is Sirat al-Mustaqim, the path of those whom you have blessed, not of those who deserved your wrath, nor the strayers. So it is a first part of it is glorification of God, recognition of God's power and greatness, recognition of two of the attributes of God, most compassionate, most merciful, that are specifically singled out. So God wants us to know that He is compassionate and merciful, and these are probably the two characteristics all of us should seek to emulate the most ourselves, given that they are singled out like that. But then the rest of it is prayer. So the first part of that prayer it goes Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, which means guide us on a straight path. So that is the core of everything. So we want to be guided on this. So if we want to walk on Sirat al-Mustaqim, or the straight path, we have to know what it is. And this is found in chapter 6, verses 151 to 153. And in these verses, Prophet Muhammad is instructed to say by God. So the verses start with the word kul, which means say. So it's a command. So we can be sure that he actually said this to his people, right? He stood in front of them and he said these. These words came out of his mouth. He said, "Come, let me tell you what your Lord has made haram or forbidden for you, that you should associate anything with him." And then he goes on to say, "And do good to your parents, and do not kill your children out of fear of poverty. We provide for you and for them. And do not approach fawahisha, which is sexual immorality, whether it's hidden or out in the open. And do not kill a soul that God has made forbidden, except for the requirements of justice. These are His commandments to you, that you may understand." So He's telling people this. This is God's commandments to you, that you may understand. "And do not approach the property of an orphan except in the most righteous manner until they reach maturity. And give full weight and measure with justice. We do not burden a soul beyond its ability. And when you speak, be just, even if it's against your own family. And keep your deal with God. These are His commandments to you, that you may be mindful, that you may think about them, right? That you may keep them in your mind, so that you may do them." And then he finishes by saying, "And this is my Sirat al-Mustaqim." So he is standing in front of people, and he just said all this, and he says, "This is my straight path, so follow it. And do not follow any other paths, for they may lead you away from His path, God's path. These are His commandments to you, that you may be careful of your duty to God, that you may have taqwa." So he says, if you're going to focus on anything, this is what you're going to focus. And this is the core of that onion, Everything else in the Quran, majority of the Quran expands on this, gives lessons on this, and everything in the Quran is about this. So when we read the Quran, we realize eventually that this is what faith is about. So for example, when we read the rest of the Quran and we see verses about justice, right? And this is what God said this is what Prophet Muhammad told people, or what God told him to tell us here in chapter 6, verses 151 to 153. Be just, even if it's against family. And there are other verses in the Quran that says, for example, "O you who believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even against yourselves, or your family, or your parents, whether they're rich or poor, for God is near to them both. And do not follow your desires, lest you deviate. And if you decline or distort, then God knows what you do." In other verses, it says, it tells us to be just, even if we hate people, right? If we dislike people, don't let the hatred of them cause you to be unjust. So there are many verses, for example, about justice like that. Lots of verses about orphans then throughout the Quran. which basically kind of continue on this, do not abuse orphans. Uh, Lots of verses on fawahisha, which is sexual immorality. Uh, and then we are given examples in the Quran. So another layer of this onion is an examples about cities that were destroyed before us, right? So God had these people, and they did something to where they were deserving of God's wrath. So this is going back to Surah Fatiha. We ask God, don't guide us on the path of those who deserve your wrath. And then God includes these people in there. And for example, so the people of Prophet Lot, it says what they did, and they did fawahisha. So when they were destroyed, we know they did that, so we can go back to the core of this onion and be like, this is what is absolutely unacceptable. If you are a Muslim, this is what you cannot do, and this is what you need to know. And it's that is how Quran has to be read. Or for example, in the 650 151 to 153, it says, and give full weight and measure with justice. We do not burden a soul beyond its ability. Well, this is talking about business. And there's a whole surah called Mutaffifin in the Quran. And it says, woe be to Mutaffifin, which is those who basically cheat in business. Uh, and, it keeps warning about that. Also in chapter 17, there is that command as well. So it just keeps talking about that. And for example, the people of Midian were mutaffifin. They were those who cheated others in business, and God destroyed them for that eventually. So it is very important to understand how the Quran is structured as a book. It is layered like an onion. At its very core is Sirat al-Mustaqim. Because if you are not doing that, then you are doing something that the people who were destroyed before us were doing. And when all their examples are given, usually one or two of the precepts described as Sirat al-Mustaqim, they violated only one or two. They didn't violate anything else. The example of them is one or two precepts they violated, and that's why they're destroyed. So God explains us that these precepts are the most important in several layers of information. First it is the core, when Prophet Muhammad tells people what Sirat al-Mustaqim is. Then it is the second layer of onion, where this is expanded upon with other verses. And then the third layer of the onion, where examples are given of people who were destroyed. So everything really focuses back on a core of the book, which is strict moral behavior, and that is what it means to be Muslim, and that is how this book has to be read. And it's really not more complicated than that. Now, implementing this is very difficult. Just implementing justice and doing to people what you want done to yourself is very, very difficult, because we're always biased, and that requires a lot of these practices that are made mandatory, like prayer, which is how you learn the Quran, and fasting, and constant reflection on our own behaviors and on the existence of God, like remembrance of God. Knowing that God is watching you is something that has to be with us all the time in order for us to adjust our behavior, because we fall into bad habits very easily. We fall into biases really easily. We are selfish, and we are self-centered, because nobody in this world wakes up and thinks about others. They think about themselves. It's just a fact of life. But that comes naturally, and we have to kind of change that to where we're actually thinking about God, and that governs our behavior. So we walk on Sirat al-Mustaqim, because this is what Prophet Muhammad told people is important. And he told them that, these are his commandments to you, that you may have taqwa, that you may be careful of your duty to God. So this is what we have to think about. And that's it really is that simple. That is 90% of the religion. So that's it.